Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast with me, Karen Maloney. I am your host, and the intention of this podcast is to help us open our minds, get curious about ourselves, and to raise our vibration and consciousness levels. Through these conversations, we hope that you will go on an inward journey to discover the truth of who you are and to become aware of your own energy and vibration. We have the power to consciously create our lives, but we need to wake up to this fact before we can begin the process and learn the key of self-responsibility. Check out the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Acast, Castbox, or whatever platform you listen on, and please like, subscribe, and share the podcast. Leave a review, leave a rating, as this will help it to reach more people. Check out my website as well, www.soulpowerlight.com. Hello everybody. Welcome. It's me, Karen Maloney, and thanks for tuning in for another episode. I have another fantastic guest for you this week. Before I jump into telling you about today's guest, I want to let you know and invite you to a free online webinar that I will be doing on Wednesday, the 21st of April from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. UK time. And I will share some tips on how you can break old habits in 3 simple steps. We are creatures of habits. We all have habits that don't best support us, and I will share some tools and tips to help you shift and create more empowering habits. So check out my Facebook page, soulpowerlight.com, and you will see the event there, or it is also on eventbrite.com if you search for it there. Register in advance, and I look forward to seeing you then. So back to today's guest, and this week I have Riana Milne joining me, and Riana is a certified global life and love coach, clinical trauma and addictions professional, mindfulness coach, #1 best-selling author, and host of her own podcast called Lessons in Life and Love. She is also an educational speaker and a licensed mental health counsellor for over 20 years, living in Palm Beach County, Florida. She was also a life and dating coach for the Docu-Series Radical Dating, Finding Lasting Love Over 40. And Riana also specialises in those who have had past childhood trauma or relationship trauma and offers coaching programs for both singles and couples. She is also the author of a number of books, 2 of which are Love Beyond Your Dreams, Break Free of Toxic Relationships to Have the Love You Deserve, and Live Beyond Your Dreams, From Fear and Doubt to Personal Power, Purpose and Success. So this conversation with Riana again was just really fascinating and interesting, and a lot of it really centered around trauma and childhood trauma and how that can impact in adult life when it comes to life in general, but also dating. Riana, through her extensive work in counselling and coaching and through her own life experiences, has put together and created a list of the most common childhood traumas. It's a list of 10, and as she mentions, there are many more, but from what she has seen in her experience through her vast work, every person's trauma could fit into one or a few of these. So it's a super interesting list and really makes a lot of common sense. She also talks about how trauma can become very unconscious and normalized if it's left unhealed, and how trauma is held in the cells, in the body and in the brain. And that's why it's super important that awareness is brought to the trauma in order to heal it and release it. So much from this conversation. Riana shares some of the non-negotiables that she does with all of her clients in her work. And she also talks a little towards the end on dating and being in relationship and how to, well, whether you're single, how to attract the relationship that you want. And if you're a couple, how can you have a more conscious relationship? So it was a really interesting conversation, and Riana's overall mission is really to try to help the way the world loves, and to love in a more loving, kind, gentler and conscious way. So you can check out more on Riana's work. She has loads of free resources as well on her website, as well as her books and her different coaching packages. And you can check all that out at www.rianamilne.com. And again, as always, everything will be linked from the show notes on my website, soulpowerlight.com, and click the podcast section. Enjoy. Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining for another episode. I have another wonderful guest for you today, and her name is Riana Milne. So first of all, you're very welcome, Riana.
Hi, thank you for having me, Karen. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation today about your work as a global life and love trauma recovery coach, and you've many other branches that you do as well. But maybe first, just describe a little bit to the listeners about your work and maybe even your path to it.
Sure. Well, many years ago, at 26 to 36, I was a model and talent agent, and I had a school. And prior to that, I lost two very dear friends. One, we were 16, and he was lost in a car crash. And at 23 at college, my best friend and roommate of 3 years was murdered by her boyfriend. So at a young stage, I started questioning how much time in life do I have? What it is that I want to do in life. And after Corinne was murdered, I said, these toxic relationships are more prevalent than people even know and realize. And it started my journey to being a very strong young woman and living life to the max and creating things with a lot of just hopes and dreams. And when I opened the model and talent agency, people had hopes and dreams to make it in entertainment, and these were small town people from Erie, PA, and I taught them what I learned through many masters, which I call the mindset for success. And we could take their hopes and dreams, and with that mindset of keen focus and belief and that they can leave this town and have the life they desire, they excelled. Even my own daughter sings on 3 multi-platinum CDs and is a host on television and so forth. So I had the agency for 10 years and loved it. And then I found I was doing a lot of coaching, just helping people psychologically. And I always wanted to be a counselor since my teens. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go back to school for my master's. And I got a triple master's in applied clinical and counseling psychology. So in year 2000, I opened up my own private practice called Therapy by the Sea in New Jersey. Was there 14 years and semi-retired to Florida and opened here. And then 2017, I went global. I got certified as a life and relationship coach through RCI in 2009 and 10, knowing full well that I preferred the coaching versus the therapy model. And but I wanted to write some excellent books before I went out there as a coach. So I have 150-page workbooks for my singles, one for my couples, and my 2 books meant for coaching, which is Live Beyond Your Dreams, From Fear and Doubt to Personal Power, Purpose, and Success, and then Love Beyond Your Dreams, which went to a #1 bestseller. So at that point, then I went out full-time coaching, and I love it because I'm able to help people around the world. And the love trauma piece, it's both life and love. So creating the life you desire and having the love you deserve. I went through traumatic love relationships and ended up annulling my last marriage to someone I adored, but he had a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde lifestyle. So to the public, everyone who thought we knew who he was, me included, was totally different than his secret life. So he lost his job, his reputation, ran out of town. And here I was left with a devastation. I said, you know what, I'm standing up for myself and I'm annulling this marriage and I'll move on from there to heal. And I found my psychotherapy friends did not know what he had. And he even said the last thing to me, I don't know why I sabotage everything I love. And I said, I don't either, but I'm going to figure it out. And back then, It was only 2011, but childhood trauma, we didn't learn this in our master's program. As a
Yeah.
therapist, we didn't even hear those terms. And it was only my deep research that I found that he did come from a lot of childhood trauma. And what he was doing made sense that this was unhealed, and unconsciously he would do impulsive and destructive things that not only ruined him personally, but our relationship as well. And then I started
Wow.
writing the book. Ended
Mm.
up being 400 pages, and I sent him a copy. And he goes, "Put my picture on it." Oh my God, I'm the poster child of this. But he
Wow.
finally understood after all these years in his 50s why he, was sabotaging everything that was important to him.
Wow, quite a story there as well. And thank you for sharing that information and really setting the scene of your path to the work that you're doing now and all the experiences as well that you've brought with you. And, you mentioned the word there as well towards the end, childhood trauma. And I can imagine, from losing people close to you at such a young age as well, that must have impacted on you as well in some form. And I'd be interested, because I know it's something you do a lot of in your work as well, is talking about trauma and childhood
Right.
trauma. And I think it's such a huge, important topic to even clarify what it is exactly and how it can show up for people or how it can impact
Yeah.
on people.
With that loss of my childhood friend, we were best friends since we were 5. I said to my mom, I said, I'm really sad. I think I need to go to a counselor. And she says, no one in this family will ever go to a counselor. It was like shameful. And I said,
Yeah,
well, then I'm going to grow up and become one. And
well
I did
done.
it in Michael's spirit, and today, thank God, mental health, people are realizing people go through things,
Yeah.
right? And if you have a teenager asking for help and support, don't hesitate. Teen suicide is on the rise. I worked in a hospital center with kids aged 5 to 19. There were runaways, eating disorders, self-mutilation and cutting. I mean, suffering in many ways, and they're either
Yeah.
internalizers, which are the quiet sufferers, or the externalizers that are out causing trouble or having risky sex or whatever it is. But these are signs, that they're reaching out, that they need help. So if you identify that your kids or your teens need help, get them to someone immediately that can help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, the internal and the external sufferers, that's certainly true. So then talk to us a little bit about trauma. What is it exactly? And I know you have 10 different types of trauma, childhood trauma, that can have an impact.
Yes, there's actually more than 10, but in all the populations that I worked with, not only the hospital center, but I worked in schools as a SAC counselor, student assistance counselor, from grades kindergarten through college. So I was one that handled the emotionally upset kids, the kids identified as oppositional defiant, the ADHD kids, the bullies or the bullied, any type of emotional upset. And also I worked with women from the prison system and kids that ended up in drug and alcohol facilities. So I had all this experience with all these different populations, but the traumas were the same over and over and over again that just kept arising, right? So I put together this checklist when I was doing this research, which I call simply the childhood trauma checklist. And it's the top 10, and people can very easily relate to it. So as we go through it, I always want to explain that this is not about blaming your parents at this stage of life, because
Yeah.
trauma goes through at least 3 generations. And if you had childhood trauma, it's definite that your parents had it as well. And of course, the research showed 90% of people admit to some of these traumas, having at least 1 to 3 on the top 10 list. And then some of the researchers say, and the other 10% are sociopaths who say, nothing's wrong with me, it's all you, you know.
Yeah.
So you'll hear more and more, all of us has suffered with some trauma. So it's so common, and it's just important that you recognize it as a fact. Did this happen when you were young or did it not? And not looking at it in any kind of shameful way, right? You were just a child of your environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's important to understand before I go through them. So the first one is if you grew up with a parent with any addiction, so drugs or alcohol, but sex, so knowing that your parent was a chronic cheater, or porn, gambling, hoarding, spending, eating, gaming, TV watching, workaholism, or even social media addiction.
Mm.
Those types of addictions can be most prevalent in an adult life, kind of just, ignoring the child's needs.
Yeah.
Okay, the second one is verbal trauma. So you could have been watching your parents yelling and fighting with each other, or they could have screamed at you, yelled at you. This also includes never hearing the words, I love you. And it
Mm.
was so ironic. I was on the beach yesterday and I said, I never heard those words from my mom. And I was with two other gentlemen from my peer group, and they said, I didn't hear it either.
Mm.
So the baby boomers, of which I'm a part of, my mom said, well, I didn't hear those words. Like, we grew up in the Great Depression. It was
Yeah.
all about survival.
Yeah.
So again, that was normalized to her. But when kids are out and they see other parents saying, I love you, and it's like, wow, my mom never tells me that.
Mm.
That's a sad thing, right? Okay. Even verbal slurs are put down, like you look heavy in that, go change your outfit,
Mm.
put something nicer on, just those put downs, or not hearing compliments, like I'm proud of you, kiddo, great job. If you don't hear these messages, they're very impactful as an adult. Third is emotional abuse or neglect. Fourth is physical abuse in or outside of the family, sexual abuse, rape, and molestation. Now, let's say you had an incredible family life, but then you go off to school and you were beat up every day at school,
Mm.
or you were sexually molested by the first love of your life. You were telling them no, and this happened to you, right? So these are just happening during the age of childhood through, young adulthood, and it could be in or outside of the home. The next trauma is abandonment. So there's fault and no fault abandonment. No fault abandonment would be as if a parent died early.
Mm.
If a parent goes off for war and serves, believe me, in the schools, I was there during the Afghanistan war. These kids were so emotionally anxious all day long. Haven't heard from my dad. I hope he's
Mm.
okay. Do you think he'll come home, Miss Riana? I mean, that's all they could think about.
Yeah.
And then they're later identified as ADHD. I said, she's not ADHD. She's suffering with this loss and worry that her father's okay. So these are things that schools have to look deeper into the
Mm.
emotional aspect of their kids and what they're going through. Another example would be, and this was one of my scenarios, I remember asking a lot as a child, when's dad coming home? Because we never knew where my dad was. And my mom's were, I don't know where he is. And we later find out he was CIA and FBI. And you can't tell your family where you are and what your job is. It is undercover. And we found out when he was later sick and elderly, and we got letters from Ronald Reagan and William Casey from the FBI thanking him for his many years of service. But it's traumatizing for your kids when you don't know when your parent is. But it was no fault, because that's how we supported the family, right? Okay, so those are examples. Fault abandonment is if you're never in your child's life, if you are, and then the couple breaks up and you're rarely in your child's life, or you might be there full time, but you're emotionally checked out. You're tuned into TV, you chase the kids away, you don't go to their sport or athletic events or their art events. You're just not emotionally engaging much with your child. So those are fault abandonments. That's very big abandonment. The next one is if you're part of the foster care system, you were adopted, you had to go live in other people's homes because your parents couldn't keep you at that house, or they lost the house and the family's all split up, scenarios like that. Trauma number 7 is one that most people can identify with, which is personal trauma. That's if you were ever bullied, if you ever felt different or not good enough. So you could have been a chubby, overweight child, or a skinny and gawky child, or even called a nerd in school. You could have been the only African American girl in a whole school of Caucasian kids. You could have been coming out as LGBTQ and not accepted and teased because you looked different, you looked more masculine, and you were a girl. All kinds of reasons that you just don't feel like you fit in or are good enough. This one is huge, and most people can identify with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Trauma number eight. That's one of mine too. I was bullied as a kid. Okay. Trauma number eight is sibling trauma. Your sibling could have bullied you. They could have been born with a medical issue where mom and dad had to give them more time and attention. Or third, that they were perceived as the golden child, the favored one. So they could have been the smarter kid and you're always compared to them, or more handsome or beautiful, or the star athlete, right?
Mm,
Dad favored the star athlete and barely talked to you. So, I mean, those dynamics go around siblings. Trauma number nine is two parts. One part everyone in our world is going along with today, and this is community trauma.
mm.
And the COVID pandemic is all over our world, and we're all suffering. So when people say, well, I didn't have any trauma, guess what? We all have this one.
Yeah.
And when you look at little children going through this, and I have five grandchildren, it's like, can they go out and play with their friends? They can't go to school.
Mm,
Why do I have to have this on my face, Mom? I can't breathe, or is my dad's going to work? Is he going to die if he goes to work? All
mm.
these scary messages that our kids are enduring around COVID right now. Believe me, we are going to see this play out when
Yeah.
they become adults, right? And this is also our weather events, the floods, fires, hurricanes, storms that are closing down and impacting thousands of people in communities. It's also mass shootings, school shootings, anything like that is all
Mm,
identified as community traumas. Then that impacts the family. So the example, COVID, let's say, the parents lose their jobs. Now they're worried about paying the bills. They can't pay the heat bills. They're going to lose their house. So kids are hearing these messages, we don't have enough money, lack. They're afraid, right? So this is around the family. Also, if a parent's incarcerated, I know in U.S. our military families have to move every 2 to 4 years. That places
mm.
kids in new schools all the time. There's many more under family traumas, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And then trauma 10 is mental health issues in mom or dad. And it could be several, but the two most difficult for kids to really navigate is borderline and bipolar. So bipolar is manic depressive, and a manic phase could be a gambling spree, a drinking binge, spending spree when you don't have money. And a depressed stage could be checking out emotionally, extreme fatigue, or even anger. And the borderline personality disorder is erratic moods. When they're good, they're great. When they're bad, they're
Mm,
horrible, and you never know what you're going to get. They would fly off the handle at something that most people would say, well, that's not a big deal. So it leaves that child in a high state of anxiety. And I find all my clients that come to me recognize, like, I'm always feeling anxious. I can never relax.
yeah.
And that's part of the childhood trauma, because trauma stays stored in the brain and the body cells.
Um, super, super interesting. Thank you for going through all those. And like you mentioned as well, I'd say most people can identify with one or two or a couple. And that's, the importance as well. I love having these conversations because it's not about labeling or attaching or, living in fear or that, but it is that awareness, that consciousness that actually we all do carry things, but they're unconscious. And they're
Right.
subconscious. We never could pin it back to, oh, it's because, I never knew when my dad
Yes.
was going to come home from work. We don't
Yes.
make the conscious connection that these things are programmed and do carry and obviously then impact and translate into our adult lives as well. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, well, the impact or how they can show up in
Yeah.
adult form,
Sure.
whether through life or relationships, since you
Yes.
look at love as well.
Well, these patterns become very unconscious if they're unhealed and very normalized. For example, I had a couple in my office, and the man's there. She keeps yelling at me, and that's why I want to leave. Now, the woman is from South Philadelphia. I grew up in Philly, and there's a lot of Italians that live in South Philly. I have many friends, and they're all very hyper and talk to each other by kind of yelling and screaming at
Mm,
each other. But it's so normalized,
yeah.
and she looks at him and she goes, What do you mean I'm yelling at you? I never yell at you. And I just looked at her real calmly. I said, you don't hear it, do you? Because it was just so normal for her to speak with all this emotion and passion. But he came from a very calm family, and he always felt she was yelling at him. So these are what we call cultural norms, area norms, like what happens within that area of South Philadelphia. That's very normal there, but it depends on your partner, right? So you can emotionally trigger someone and not even realize you're doing it. Where does like lying and manipulation comes from? This is normally a child that was afraid to be punished by a very severe mother or father. So they felt, well, if I lie and get away with it, I have a 50% chance of not getting beat today. If you're someone that always needs control, and I work with a lot of very successful business people, successful in business, but control in love and end up losing their partners. This is usually someone that lacked a lot of control as a child. There was a lot of chaos and drama in their house. So as an adult, like they want things just so. They could be perfectionistic in their home or on the job. Well, on the job, this can often work and lead to success. You're very organized. But if you take that into your relationship, it could often ruin it. Jealousy comes from trauma number 7, not feeling good enough, even if your partner's really telling you you're amazing, I think you're beautiful, but she's concerned all the time. He's looking at other people. This is because deep down that wound is still there. Other things that show up is perfectionism, blaming behavior. It's always someone else's fault, people that don't take responsibility or they can't apologize, and it takes a long time to forgive. Impulsivity is one. People pleasing happens to a lot of women. Again, this would be the woman growing up, let's say with an alcoholic mom who might be used to doing everything to please her, to help the siblings and clean the house and overdo so she wouldn't get yelled at. So as a wife, she's overdoing, and I'll hear from someone like this, I do everything for my husband and my kids. They do nothing for me. They don't love me. So overdoing was a way to show and get love. And it became normalized, and she's burnt out and she's resentful and exhausted. Abandonment issues show up by being overly clingy. Love addiction can occur, codependencies, and they tend to get into repetitive toxic relationships. And if they're in a relationship, the studies show these break up and get back together an average of 7 times before the more emotionally healthy person just says, I've had it, can't do it, block the number, and then they're finally done, right? But that craving for love is so deep that they'll say, well, at least I know he loves me. Maybe we can get back what we had in the beginning, always striving for the beginning part of the relationship and, almost settling for crumbs in a way because there's a little love, but the toxic times are really, really bad. So we call this the cycle of abuse or the cycle of violence. The calm, peaceful periods, about 10 days, and then something will be said or a look will be given, and then they'll snap out again. So these can be very emotionally draining and very toxic on the body. Someone in a toxic relationship, they might have irritable bowel syndromes, constant stomach aches, can't sleep, overeat, undereat, just feel exhausted and drained all day, get fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. So when this trauma stays stored in the brain and the body cells, the body actually gets so sick from all the stress.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. The impact that this toxicity or like that, everything is held in our body subconsciously as well. Then if it's not released, how it can and does present physically, it's our body's way of talking to us, of trying to get our attention. But again, we're not taught the tools. We're just taught, oh, something's going on with my body and I just need to take a pill to fix it. Not thinking,
Right, that whole pill culture.
yeah, not thinking
Right.
that maybe there's a whole bigger picture, that this is something that's been building since childhood, or, through repeated episodes of patterns that are playing out that have been unhealed. So
Correct.
I love that you mentioned that as well, because it's super important to have the bigger picture in mind always, and that conscious connection of where things can be stemming from. So I'd love to, because yes, trauma is stored in the body, then what is the solution, or how can people release that, or what processes can they do to help shift some of that emotional energy that's stored?
Right. There's many techniques and skills I use. First, I have to analyze what are the 10 traumas they went through, because everyone's a different puzzle, depending on what their experience was. Second, what is the severity level, which I judge as 1 to 10? How severe is it? Like a 10 is you were beaten every day. A 2 could be, yeah, I had like 2 bad beatings, but, I did act out and I guess I deserve them. It's not staying with them too much, right?
Yeah.
So I have to analyze the severity levels. And then 3, what is coming up in their adult life? So let's say a woman had a father that was a yeller. He always yelled at mom, yelled at the kids, and she's always attracting men that are yelling or emotionally, verbally abusing her. She can't figure out why. Well, the soul or the psyche is attracted to what it knows, to what is normal for them, even though consciously it's toxic, right? So once I know what's really going on, if it's a single struggling and finding emotionally healthy love, or a couple, if it's the couple, I have to heal partner A's trauma, partners B's trauma, and then C is the relationship and how it shows up. So it really depends who's in front of me. There are standard things that we do, like spiritual divine meditation. All my clients do meditation, very important, because science has showed it lessens depression, anxiety, cortisol, which is your fight or flight response, blood pressure, and then increases dopamine and serotonin levels of the brain, which are your happy chemicals. So every one of my clients do that. They all learn about reparenting, taking these old, horrible, toxic experiences, trying to understand them with a more forgiving spiritual heart, learning how to reparent themselves when they are what we call emotionally triggered. They feel their blood spike and their heart racing, or the anxiety come up. This is what we call being triggered. And they have to identify which trauma did this come from, why is their body doing this, and then they have 4 to 5 different things that they do to learn to calm themselves, right? So and then I do vitamin therapy for everyone, depending what they're experiencing. My people are not on psychotropic drugs. Some come to me on anti-anxiety, but they have a bunch of side effects, and they're like, no, I want to get to the root of the problem. I don't want the Band-Aid. I want to get to the real solution, and I want to be in a holistic life. That's also looking at our diet. There's so many chemicals in the standard diet, especially in the U.S., so much junk food. You have to go totally organic and really healthy, because that's feeding the cells and the brain, and you feel better. So it's a holistic mind, body, spirit philosophy that we have here, and I look at everything. So there's many techniques, and I work with my clients from 4 to 6 months. So we have a lot to cover in that time period.
Yeah. I love it that you add in all those elements as well, and take that holistic approach, because again, it's what needs to happen, because we are a mind, body, and soul. We are more soul than physical person, and it's vitally important to connect all those aspects, and diet and vitamins and learning the triggers and the reparenting and meditation as well. So super powerful. And I love that you mentioned that as well, because again, it's something that, is more and more common. Loads of people know that there are benefits, but again, we'll never truly know without taking the action. And that's the only way that we will know the power of it. So I love that you mentioned that as well.
And then for the singles, they must learn what is an emotionally healthy, conscious partner and how to attract one. So they are learning dating skills that they've learned nowhere else. There's a big part that's psychology, spirituality, being able to handle it emotionally, knowing the questions to ask. So you feel empowered and you're choosing. You're not just waiting around to be chosen.
Yeah.
Or the worst part, falling in love just because of chemistry.
Yeah.
That's the worst way to fall in love. And then my couples need to learn all new communication skills and ways to interrelate as best friends and safe, right? A lot of women come to me not feeling safe in their relationships. And the man has to understand the importance. Cave woman brain, the number one thing she craves is safety because she's a childbearer. That's in our old reptilian brain. So if that man is not making her feel safe, she's not going to feel connected. He's got to understand these things. So there's so much to teach. And then they learn the new communication skills with the understanding of each other's traumas and being able to own it when it comes up, where it's coming from. So now the partner doesn't say, he's attacking me again, right? She doesn't say that. He'll say, you know what, hon, I was angry, but that's not about you.
Yeah.
My boss criticized me today, and I know I came home feeling angry today, and I want to apologize, right? So it's a whole new way of thinking, being, relating for the couples.
Yeah, and it's so powerful because, again, like it has been mentioned on this podcast in so many different conversations, again, it comes back to ourselves and really taking responsibility and knowing ourselves and doing that inner reflection. Because, again, these things are unconscious. So if we don't take the time to bring them to awareness, so we know what triggers us, we know that, you know, if our partner says something, it actually has nothing to do with what they're saying. It's an old wound. So it's just that responsibility piece as well. It's just so vital. And just something you mentioned as well, which was something I was curious to ask is, you know, what does an emotionally healthy relationship look like as well? Or I know you mentioned it, I suppose, in a couple already there. It's that clear communication. It's knowing, you know, your triggers and that. But say for someone who is looking now at the moment, how can they see an emotionally or know an emotionally available person?
Yes. Well, in my book, Love Beyond Your Dreams, there is section 4, which is pages and pages and pages of what to look for. So in a short interview, I can't name a lot, but there's a lot in that book. For couples, I say you start with the concept, it's you and me against the world. You must learn to put your partner first, not the kids, not your parents, not your friends. Because if you put those in front first, the relationship usually falls apart. Most people put kids first. And unfortunately, then the romance and that passion dies and they're just roommates. And by the time the kids are out of the house, there's a divorce. So you must be very conscious of how much fun time, quality time you're having with your partner. I talk a lot about balanced triangles in my course. So for couples, it's you, me, and us, right? So you have your time, which is your work or your gym time, and then us could be going to church together, your date nights, 2 nights a week, you know, whatever you'd like to do together. For singles, I say be what you want to attract. If you want someone emotionally healthy, you be emotionally healthy. Because once you've gotten this system down, you're going to be able to spot people that are angry, lashing out still at their mothers, because when you're emotionally healthy, you're not going to settle for someone that isn't, right? So there's that 24 questions that my singles know to ask on date 1 or 2 that really identify where they are in their emotional path. Are they living emotionally healthy and conscious lives? You want to see if, you know, your 5 to 6 requirements are met. So I work, you know, with people 26 to 36 also who want to find a good partner for marriage and a family. And then I work with people, you know, 45 to 65 who have been through several toxic relationships or marriages and don't want to make the mistake again and can't figure out what's going wrong, right? So for the younger people, for example, I say, Okay. Are you a woman that sees yourself wanting marriage and a family? Oh, definitely. Yes, that's what I want. I said, then you need to know before that first date or on the first date if they feel the same.
Mm,
So if they answer, well, yeah, maybe I'll have kids if she really wants them, I say that's a no. He's
yeah.
not really thrilled about having kids. You need to hear, like my daughter, when she asked her husband, oh my gosh, yes, I couldn't even imagine my life complete if I wasn't a dad. I'm real
Yeah.
close to my dad. That's a yes, right? So
Yeah.
we define what their requirements are and the type of answers they're looking for. And if there's a slew of chemistry and that answer's a no, that lady says that's a one and done date. I'm done. Next,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
don't push it. You don't hope for it, right? You have to be realistic in what we call conscious dating.
Yeah.
With an older person, let's say this is a woman that wants to retire where I live in Florida, the land of sunshine, of paradise, right? And she's up in the Northeast. And the guys are, well, if we fall in love, you'll stay here where it's snowy and we'll go to Colorado and ski. And it's like, no, that's not my requirement. My requirement for my happiness and peace of mind is sun all year round. I don't care if I see another snowflake. So they are really identifying what's important for them. So they have an idea when they're out there dating exactly what they're looking for. It's super
Yeah.
important. Then they're looking at emotional similarities, functional needs that are similar. And the research shows one of the most common aspects for a successful marriage or relationship is sharing the same spiritual faith. Not religious practice, but spirituality.
Love it. That's brilliant. And thank you as well for sharing that. And yeah, so super important. Again, comes back to that defining, who we are, who we want to be, or how we want our life to look. And, if someone doesn't fit that, if they don't want that, like you say, not waiting on that hope, we don't have to settle. It's like, okay, thank you, but no thanks.
That's right.
And, not putting our own desires aside just because something is presenting, and
Right.
love that. And sharing the same spiritual practice. How amazing is that?
We
All
just
comes
say,
to
just release them in love. Say you're really a great
Yeah.
person. We're just not quite a match. And you keep
Exactly.
dating.
Yeah, love that. Then I just, before we wrap up, to know what was one of your maybe greatest personal learnings or most favorite trait when it comes to relationships?
Really uncovering the whole science of emotional trauma was huge for my healing. I couldn't get answers anywhere else, and I really needed that to heal. And once I opened that world of the research, I was helping so many people in my practice, and I just said, I have to go global with this message. So my mission was to try and help the way the world loves, to love in a more loving, kind, conscious way, and the importance of self-love and knowing what you want, and loving in a kinder, gentler way.
Brilliant. What a fabulous message to end on as well. Riana, it's been super insightful and informative, and thank you for sharing. And please share where people can find out more about your work.
Okay, sure. First of all, I want to encourage everyone, start today to create that life you desire and have the love you deserve. And you can get a lot of free resources at my website. It's rianamilne.com, just my name. And there's a free ebook on childhood trauma, 32 pages that goes into this deeper. You can do the 4 free love tests. There's tests for couples and for singles, like the red flag checklist to see if you're with a toxic partner. So they're very insightful. Then you can go to the books page and get the first 60 pages of Live and Love Beyond Your Dream. Sister books. They're meant to go together. One's about the mindset for success, and the other one is about success in love. So get those. And then I have 106 podcasts in Lessons in Life and Love. That's what it's called. And my YouTube channel, I have like 225 videos and audios. So it's a lot of free resources there at the Riana Milne channel. And just to get all the highlights of what I do, summits and interviews such as this, my Facebook page, Coach Riana Milne, is where I post everything. So look for that. Also for Karen's show to be out there.
Yeah.
This podcast. Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And yes, there is so much information. As always, I will link everything as well from the show notes on my website. But
Great.
Again, just thank you so much for joining today and for sharing. I think it's a super empowering conversation, and one, again, of that higher consciousness and the bigger picture perspective, which I think is important that we always take into account as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Kara. And then God bless you and all our listeners.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get notified every time a new show is released. Get more information on this week's guest as well on my website, www.soulpowerlight.com.